Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. This is Michael Siggins, and I'm the publisher of Channel Pro. Thank you so much for being here. Our topic today in our webinar is titled Defend Against Data Loss, How to Avoid Losing Data in Office 365. Before we get going, we're just going to take a moment to welcome everybody. It usually takes just a few seconds for folks to come in and find their virtual seats. So come on in, get comfortable, and we're going to get going in just a moment. All right, nice to see so many people joining in. Again, as I mentioned, this is Michael Siggins, publisher of Channel Pro. Thank you so much for being here. Channel Pro, for those of you who are not quite sure of all the things that we do, we produce a website, events, and a monthly magazine for managed service providers and integrators. Our mission is to provide you with the information, insights, and resources that you need to run a more successful business. This webinar today is a perfect example of that kind of info to help you in your business. As I mentioned, our topic today is Defend Against Data Loss, How to Avoid Losing Data in Office 365. And it's presented today by Carbonite. Our very special guests today will be Ryan Buccianico, owner of IT solutions firm ABC Solutions LLC, and also Ryan Crompton from Carbonite. Before we begin the prezo, a few quick housekeeping items. Please get involved. I always encourage that because it makes for a much better experience, both for our presenters and the rest of the audience. So please ask any questions that you've got via the Q&A module, and you can find that right down at the bottom center part of your screen. We will be following up tomorrow with additional info and a link to the recording and the slides. All right, now I'm going to turn things over to our presenters. The way it's going to work today is we're going to start things off with Ryan and then transition over to Ryan. So Ryan, please take it away.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. My name is Ryan Buccianico. I'm an enrolled agent. I'm the owner of ABC Solutions. We are an accounting firm that specializes in working with MSPs across the US and Canada and even abroad, helping with accounting, taxes, and business consultants. I'm also a partner in a company called Sell My MSP, and we are a listing service providing buyers and sellers and introducing them together. And most recently, a friend and I started a new podcast series called PSA Impact. You can find us on all of the podcast catchers out there. It is a PSA independent podcast series talking about how to get the most out of your MSP through your PSA and RMM tools. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is some of the trends that I'm seeing in the channel. And here's one that's probably not a surprise to anyone. So one of the major trends that we're seeing in the channel is the mergers and acquisitions. And it seems that not a week goes by without hearing about one. We just heard about the ConnectWise Continuum merger last week. This week it's Tech Data. You know, next week it might be somebody else. So, but as while we all want, you know, some big company, some big equity company to come in and offer us, you know, X billion dollars for our companies, not all of us are these huge conglomerates. But the smaller MSPs are joining into the M&A craze too. And you know, you will find that many of the MSPs either are looking to find a way to exit their business or, you know, grow through acquisition. Sometimes if you purchase an existing MSP or an existing IT company, you may find that it's much easier and it's faster growth pattern than, you know, organic growth through BNI meetings or networking and local chamber events. You know, so there's a lot of that going on. And if you have the extra cash, it may be faster and more economical to simply purchase an existing MSP that is out there. And, you know, many of the MSPs, because we're seeing such big changes in the channel over the last few years. You know, the IT channel goes back at least 30 years, at least. And so many of those that were, you know, the younger generation back then are looking to find their exit strategy. And so what they may be doing is, you know, taking a look at their business, look at, their future, their lives, and, trying to develop a plan to exit gracefully out of their business. So that kind of brings me to my next trend that I'm seeing is those business and financial metrics. Because before you can sell or even purchase a business, you have to be able to understand whether that business is profitable and where that business is profitable. And so MSPs are taking, concerted efforts to learn and understand their profits, their indicators, their KPIs. Financial dashboards are just where it's at right now. So, some of the financial metrics that are, or the business metrics even, how well is your service desk performing? How well are the people in your service desk performing? Are you taking a look at the resource utilization rates? Are you sure that everybody is working to full capacity, or is there room for growth or improvement? What can we automate? Is there something that we can change in our PSA to help us automate some of our service processes? Then, while we are working on the service desk and the service delivery aspect of our business, we also need to make sure that the company is just as profitable. There's plenty of tools out there that we can use, to help deliver services at alarming rates, but they all come with a cost. So you want to make sure that your profits and your return on investment of those tools is where you need to be so that your company remains profitable. And cash flow is always one of the biggest drivers of the financial metrics. When am I going to run out of cash? And how can I know that 3 weeks in advance so that I'm not getting triggered right at 2 days before payroll, that there's not enough money in the bank? So those are a couple of the trends that I'm seeing. But then, and of course, this is no surprise to anybody, we have, something as a service, we'll call it, whether we are offering firewalls or hardware as a service or software as a service or infrastructure as a service, there is no question that something as a service is very large in the channel today. And so we are offering more hosted solutions and cloud-based solutions, but the thing that we need to remember is that the business data that we are using has not changed, right? So the big companies are still out there. They are still, processing data. They're collecting the information. The data has not changed. The volume of it most certainly has, and so has the way that we process that data. And even though we still have all of that data in mounds and mounds of it, it still needs protection. And I'm sure that everybody has a story, but I have one for you that I'm going to leave with you. And it's one of those stories that you are certain it's never going to happen to you. So I got a phone call from a client, and they told me that at some point a few days ago, a few days prior to that, they received a phone call from, and I'm using air quotes here, somebody at Microsoft, and we all know that it's not Microsoft, but it was a very convincing person who convinced them that there was a problem with their computer and they needed to gain access in order to, solve the problem for them. Now, this client knows that I have every protection under the sun on those machines, and that it's not only unlikely, it's practically impossible that Microsoft will ever call them, and try to gain access to their machines. It just doesn't happen. And we have taught them that over and over again. But still, the client's employee let somebody connect to the machine. And as the person was, popping around in the machine, the employee started to get nervous, and, the little hairs stood up on the back of her neck. And so she disconnected the call. But what she failed to do was disconnect the connection to her computer. So 19,000 files, all on a shared cloud drive, gone. And they didn't know what to do. So of course they call me in a panic, and I go out to the backup software and I restore all of the data. But so so we, we're doing backup as a service, we're doing everything as a service, however, so even though all of that information might be in Office 365 or on the cloud, and it's safe as safe can be, if it's mapped to a local machine, maybe it's not so safe. So, so that was my thoughts on the current trends that's going on in the IT channel. Again, my name is Ryan, excuse me, Ryan Buccianico with ABC Solutions, and I hope you found some of this information valuable. Thank you very much for having me on today.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you very much. Yeah, very timely stuff. And I know I'm sure what you just described there, that last anecdote, is something all too common, both with our, even some of our own MSP firms. We often can fall prey to things like that. So thank you very much for sharing it. And just a quick reminder to our audience, I see some questions coming in already for Ryan. Please definitely send in your questions. And what we're going to do is roll all the questions to the end after we also hear from Ryan. So Ryan, that's your cue. I see your slides up. Please take it away, Ryan.
All right. Thank you for the kindly introduction, and thank you, Rayanne, for presenting that excellent anecdote there at the end. Very timely, particularly given what we're going to be presenting here today. By way of introduction, my name is Ryan Crompton. I am a product manager with Carbonite. Included in the portfolio of products I manage is our Carbonite backup for Office 365 solution. So my goal today is to step you through, first, why you need a solution to back up Office 365 and how you can enable such a solution through typical MSP channels. Second, how the solution works, and then finally a brief demonstration at the end. And again, any questions you do have, feel free to put those in the chat. We want to make sure that we're answering specifically to your concerns as we go through this. Okay, so let's talk about Office 365 and what your responsibilities as a managed service provider are versus your customer responsibilities versus Microsoft's responsibilities. Those of you who've been in the MSP market a long time have probably done things like run SQL on your own premises for your customers, and even more likely, run managed Exchange for your customers. In circumstances like that, you probably implemented solutions like Exchange database availability groups or other things in order to ensure uptime, even in the event of hardware failure. And I would almost guarantee that all of you ran a backup solution alongside that. Backup solution solves a different problem than availability does. Availability is offering the service to your customers. Backup allows you to regress to a point in time that you would prefer to. Microsoft, in the migration to Office 365, has quite elegantly solved for the availability issue. There's no longer a need for a service provider to run something like an Exchange database availability group, because Microsoft has solved for that with a very highly available architecture. But what Microsoft has not done is absolved MSPs of the need to execute backups for their customers. The reason being, Microsoft themselves don't want to be in possession of data that the customer has indicated that Microsoft is no longer entitled to. If you instruct Microsoft to delete something, then Microsoft is going to delete it. The last thing Microsoft wishes to be accused of is invading the privacy of its users by holding on to data past the point at which the customer has requested it be deleted. As a result, Microsoft will delete things when somebody with the proper administrative capability instructs them to be deleted. And there's a lot of administrative back and forth day to day that goes on with a lot of customers. There are mailboxes to be created, licenses to be assigned to users, accounts to be turned off, especially for MSPs. This might include turning off the entirety of a particular customer account, SharePoint sites to be generated for specific projects. You guys, of course, are closer to your customers than I am, so you can probably generate a much more comprehensive list of what your day-to-day customer interactions look like. But a large part of that is going to be simple things like employee onboarding and offboarding and so on. All of this falls squarely in the wheelhouse of the managed service provider or the customer administrator. Microsoft, of course, is not going to manage the day-to-day. That's on you. Unfortunately, the administration provides an attack surface that malicious actors can use in order to impact the product. If you were to talk to your Exchange or SQL guys when you ran products on premise and asked them about the number of recoveries they had to run due to human error as compared to hardware failure, you would probably see that most backups are the result of either badly written processes, processes not being followed, people acting out of turn, or simple end user error. So Microsoft has no way of determining whether a user is being ignorant, malicious, or properly executing his or her duties when data is instructed to be deleted. Bears mentioning here too that 2019 was the first year in which Office 365 Global Administrative Credentials were the most fished for credentials on the web. In years past, the #1 spot usually went to either PayPal or other payment sites. But this year, just because Office 365 represents a very fruitful attack surface for malicious actors, global administrative credentials are now the most sought after credentials via spear phishing schemas. So do be cognizant of that. It's not often that we would ever expect to see an MSP be the vector through which a malicious attack occurs, but depending on the nature of the agreements with your customer administrators certainly could be. Okay, in terms of other things here too, Microsoft, while they do make the solution highly available, things like staying in compliance with the regulatory regimes that your customers are subject to is still an issue for the MSP or the customer to address. If, for example, you are working with a dentist or doctor or a chiropractor and securing records that are subject to HIPAA, you may need to construct a method in which certain employees' data is retained well past the employee's tenure. That can be done through Microsoft licensing. It can also be facilitated through the backup program itself. So what do we offer in order to facilitate backup for Office 365? So the first thing I'll mention is that our platform is entirely cloud to cloud. There's no on-premise dependency, no network infrastructure that needs to be deployed, no software that needs to be deployed into the customer infrastructure. We take content as it resides within Office 365, encrypt it, and store it within our data centers. And we provide a management console that I'll show you here in just a moment to give you as managed service providers the ready ability to manage all of what I'm showing you here. We protect the entirety of the Office 365 suite. So that includes Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, in addition to which we can protect Teams, Planner, Groups, Project, essentially everything but Yammer and Skype for Business. We offer the ability to both back up and recover on a very fine-grained basis. So recovery can be the entirety of something like a OneDrive. It can be a single folder within a OneDrive. It can be just a couple files within a folder within any individual's OneDrive. We do support the ability to restore content from one application to another. Give you an example of a use case here. If you have an employee, again, going back to the HIPAA considerations, that was keeping patient records in his OneDrive and that employee leaves the company, you'll probably need a way to retain those records. Paying Microsoft to keep his OneDrive turned on may not be the best way to accomplish that. You can use our solution to recover the contents of his OneDrive into a SharePoint site of your choice. And that SharePoint site can then have your legal, HR, or other entitled personnel have access to that content now that it's there. So you get a great deal of flexibility with it. In addition to which, the fine-grained recovery options give you a useful toolkit for handling different remediation concerns. If, for example, a customer's OneDrive is hit with CryptoLocker, the ability to recover individual files is probably not going to be particularly relevant. You need to snap the entirety of the OneDrive back to a point in time prior to which CryptoLocker executed its attack. So we support restoring everything to a previous recovery point in order to facilitate recoveries like the one I just described. All of this can be managed centrally. You can also define the frequency of backup and how long content is to be retained. Our default RPO is going to be 6 hours. That's 4 backups per day. And our default retention is 1 year, though of course all of these can be altered. Finally, Carbonite does offer 24/7 support if you do run into any issues with the solution as you see it. So you heard me list out previously what we do back up and what we don't back up. Like I said, it's pretty much everything but Yammer and Skype for Business. So let's talk about the manner in which this product can be useful, especially for MSPs. It bears mentioning here that MSPs might manage their customers' Office 365 instances differently on an MSP by MSP basis or on a customer by customer basis. SharePoint has kind of become the structured data of the Office 365 suite. We are seeing a few folks that are even doing things like migrating their file shares to SharePoint in order to facilitate having all of that content readily available in the cloud. But what that means is some MSPs grant their customers the ability to spin up SharePoint on a project by project basis. Some MSPs keep all administrative privileges to themselves. But my larger point here is there is always going to be potentially a vector by which your customers, whether through ignorance or intent, can make alterations in a way that harms functionality. So one of the unique offerings that we have is the ability to restore permissions only. In the event that somebody alters permissions on a SharePoint site, and this could be something as mundane as somebody setting or deleting an Azure AD group that in turn revokes permissions on SharePoint, even if the Azure AD admin realizes his error, you're still going to need to recover permissions for the now gone user group object. So in the event that you need to flip permissions for OneDrive sharing, SharePoint, or Teams back to a previous point in time, you can do so. This does not alter any of the underlying content, won't override it. All it is permissions only. And this is unique in that Office 365 doesn't really provide a ready means by which to do that. Another commonly asked after use case is retaining data for departed employees. Those of you who have undertaken the Office 365 MCP training have probably heard Microsoft's recommendation to simply convert a mailbox to a shared mailbox and then grant access to that mailbox to the users who need it. And that's maybe okay for maintaining the mailbox, but end users can still create content in OneDrive and other places that does need to be retained. So if you have a customer who is subject to a rigid compliance regime in which they may need to retain data 90 or 180 or 365 days after an employee exits, you might find it simpler just to facilitate retention of that data through the backup tool rather than attempting to keep their E3 or E5 license alive for an additional year at increased cost to the business. Having the content stored in the backup tool also gives you a ready way in which you can migrate that content to a more proper container. You heard me mention that we can move content from OneDrive to SharePoint. And in matter of fact, that is a very common use case for our customers who are concerned with compliance, as it does give a means by which the backup administrator can make data readily available to legal, HR, or other entitled parties without potentially subjecting that data to either an unentitled end user or keeping it on local storage that is unaudited or inaccessible. Okay, let's talk about Teams. Microsoft is positioning Teams as the Slack killer. Matter of fact, for larger organizations, Skype is going to be end of life by 2021. For smaller ones, it's going to be end of life by next year. So Microsoft is pushing heavily towards the use of Teams. And I'll be honest, we use Teams here in-house. In many respects, for especially shorter term things, it's substituted or replaced phone calls as well as shorter emails. That means that a lot of content is getting placed into Teams that could have a material impact on the way business operates. For example, if somebody puts a file in a Teams site, you will want that to be recoverable. Likewise, if you federate Teams outside of your organization and customers pass in things like contracts and other such things to Teams, you may wish to have those recoverable there as well. Unfortunately, users can still delete their own conversations. Teams conversations can be removed. There's a lot of end user entitlement that exists within Teams. And again, whether through malice or ignorance, it's possible for this content to be deleted or permission to view it revoked. So we offer the ability to back up Teams. And when we say Teams, we don't mean just the SharePoint that lurks behind Teams. We mean Teams itself, including the conversations, the files, the channel information, so on. So we're one of a very handful of products that offers this capability. We're rather proud of it. We would encourage you to check it out. Okay. Last use case I'll talk about is being able to granularly restore SharePoint. So like I mentioned, SharePoint has kind of become the unstructured data of the Office 365 world. Some entities spin up a SharePoint for every new project they undertake. Some will do it on a product by product basis. Everyone uses it a little bit differently. But in the event that you're concerned about, say, space within SharePoint, as SharePoint storage space is the most expensive thing within the Office 365 environment, entities, especially those that have been using Office 365 for a long time, are moving towards a model where legacy or no longer needed SharePoint sites are deleted or archived. If you're concerned about the content within those sites, having access to it within the backup tool gives you a means by which you can restore the old SharePoint site to a new SharePoint site location. So if you have customers that are particularly sensitive to SharePoint pricing, having a backup tool gives you a means by which you can properly manage the storage space used without risking losing content. Okay, the last thing I'll mention here is that our solution is one of the handful in which customers can bring their own encryption key. And that can mean you as an MSP, if you hold keys on behalf of your customers, can leverage your own Azure Key Vault as the key repository for the backup for Office 365 solution. Or if you would prefer to, you can use your customer's Azure Key Vault in order to encrypt their data. So this gives you, the MSP, or your customer the power to rotate or revoke encryption keys if you wish to. So again, depending on the regulatory and compliance regimes you are subject to, this may be of keen interest. Don't know if we've got anyone international on the line, but we do have GDPR compliance tools available through this as well. Okay, and then lastly, we do offer a means by which you can archive and export content in the event of a long-term Office 365 outage. This isn't really something we tout, as the probability of Microsoft losing any data or losing availability on a day-to-day basis is vanishingly low. They've done an excellent job at maintaining uptime, But if this is a concern, or if you have a customer that may be paying fines or have other considerations around the data that they're storing within Office 365, we do provide a means by which you can export it. So I'll go ahead and walk you through the solution, look, feel, and workflow. The first thing I'll mention here is that as managed service providers, you would have access to our partner portal. This gives you a means by which you can add customers over whom you have management authority and manage them directly from a single pane of glass. So if you've got 20 customers that are using Office 365 and you manage their Office 365 environments on their behalf, you can do the same with the backup toolkit, have all 20 customers under a single pane of glass. Access to this partner portal can be done either through single sign-on or explicit credentials, depending on the security model that you prefer. Okay. You can define expiration dates on a customer-by-customer basis, licensing that they're entitled to, and so on. None of this, honestly, is really going to pull your hair back, but it's always nice to know that everything can be managed in one place. Okay. You can create reporting here, have that emailed to whatever your reporting toolkit is, look at total space used, and so on. So again, nothing terribly exciting, but most most MSPs are interested in having all of their customers roll up to a single pane of glass and have the reporting visible and useful there. In terms of getting customers onboarded, most of our MSPs are able to onboard a customer of 500 seats or less within about 10 to 20 minutes. And that number goes down as the seat count goes down, generally speaking. If you simply click Invite New Customer, then you'll be prompted for their Office 365 credentials, or you can extend an email to your customer to have them authenticate. Once they've done so, they'll be prompted to register an application profile. Application profiles within Office 365 are the preferred method for granting access of third parties to the Office 365 environment. Microsoft is heavily encouraging those instead of service accounts, if you're familiar with service accounts within the Office 365 paradigm. So once you've given Carbonite permission to access the environment, you can then determine how you wish to back up content within the environment. The default mode is simply to back up everything. That's everything within Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, etc. If you want to get more granular, we do offer a fine-grained registration toolkit. I'll show you here in a moment. You can see here, select your applications. And again, by default, we're just going to back up everything within the realm of those apps. So if you select OneDrive for Business, then everybody's OneDrive will be in fact backed up. Once you've done that, we'll go ahead and kick off the initial backup. One other reason we use app profiles is to ensure that we remain compliant with Microsoft's throttling. You heard me mention previously that Microsoft is first and foremost concerned with maintaining the availability and reasonable response time of the solution, which is fine. It means that when we do our initial backup, we're going to be extracting all of the contents that are currently stored within the Office 365 environment. We want to make sure that we do that in a way that doesn't disparately impact Microsoft Azure. So registering as an app profile essentially allows us to, when executing the initial backup, hew closely to Microsoft standards for requests per second and throttling requests in such a way that we can ensure the first backup happens as fast as Microsoft would allow us to. Typically, for anything 500 seats or less, the initial backup will be anywhere between 12 and about 60 hours, just depending on the nature of the content stored there. Subsequent backups are going to be incremental in nature. It's going to be incremental to the object level. So generally speaking, incremental backups will take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes. We do surface data to you through here. So you can see here, for example, this Exchange Online backup had roughly 6,000 objects that were backed up. You can see when the next backup is going to occur. If there is an issue, it'll be surfaced under the skipped or failed objects. Again, Microsoft has really amazing uptime for Office 365 as a whole, but they do perform maintenance on things like mailboxes and OneDrive instances. Even if it's only down for maintenance 10 or 20 seconds a day, when we're talking tens of thousands of mailboxes we're backing up, there will be collisions, which will be attempting to back up the contents of a mailbox at the time at which it's down for maintenance. No problem, we'll pick it up the next time. You will see backup jobs like that occasionally return a failed or a skipped result for an object or two. Okay, you can also monitor things on a mailbox by mailbox basis if you wish to. When we're done with the backup, we will notify. You can see here, this is an example of something in which we successfully backed up nearly 4,000 objects, had one failed object. Again, that's nothing to be too concerned about. Generally speaking, if we talk about something like a 1 in a million failure, that's something we'll encounter a few times a day. When we talk about backup products, of course, we want to make sure that we're adequately addressing the restore workflow, which is really where the heart of things live. As MSPs, there's nothing worse than a panicky customer on the line, losing hundreds or thousands of dollars per hour, and a lack of familiarity or capability with the tool compels you to, look things up or not have support. So we want to make sure the restore process is as straightforward to execute as possible. Bear in mind, if you do have questions, in the event you need to execute a restore, Carbonite does have 24/7 support. So select the application you want to recover. You'll note that there are a couple here missing, like Planner and actually I think that's the only one. Exchange public folders, I think, would be the other. But yeah, every application here is listed individually. So select the content or the application whose content you wish to recover. You can do a search by the container. So if you, for example, have an employee who knows he's going to be terminated tomorrow and then today decided to delete his email and then purge it from his recycle bin, you may find that you want to recover his content from his most recent backup to either a PST or another mailbox. So you can ensure that it is preserved in order to maintain succession to whoever's replacement is. Alternately, you can just pick a point in time. Point in time is useful. Let's say that you have a company-wide cryptoware attack that happened yesterday at noon. You can simply select the last backup that occurred prior to noon yesterday and select all of the OneDrive containers that you need to recover. You heard me mention that we do backup and recovery granular to the container. So that's going to be something like an email box, a OneDrive volume, a SharePoint site collection, and so on. Folder level. So if you've got your Office 365 Exchange Online inbox structured like the default, you're going to have something like drafts, inbox, outbox, and then any additional folders you've got, and then individual emails. So you can select the granularity that you need to achieve. So if, again, we've had this happen to a couple customers, if you had something like a badly written PowerShell script, delete a bunch of boxes that you actually need, you can select all of those boxes that are on the left-hand side. On the other hand, if it's just an end user who says, hey, I need a contract from 3 years ago, we only have 18-month retention defined, can you fish that out of the backup? You can drill down into the individual email level as well. You'll note that there is an export link available for both of these. You can export content for Exchange Online content. That's going to be exported in the form of a PST file. For OneDrive content, that's going to be exported in the native file format and stored in a zip file. For things like SharePoint, we can recover all of the files within SharePoint, so document libraries. Those SharePoint permissions, of course, while we do back those up, you can only recover them in-app. So when you recover content, you can restore, like you heard me mention, to the originating location or to an alternate location. In the event you're doing something like restoring a SharePoint site in place, you can skip or merge things like folders. Likewise, for the individual content of those folders, you may wish to preserve both the original and the version coming down. So you can either pick what is the most recent M time, append a 1 to the item being downloaded, or overwrite the existing content with the content being downloaded. You'll note on the right-hand side that we do offer the ability to restore security only. Again, for things like SharePoint OneDrive, this is particularly useful. Finally, we do offer the ability to restore multiple versions of a single file. If you're uncertain which version you actually need, this is useful, so you can compare them side by side. Finally, you can leave comments in the description boxes. Those are tracked in the audit log. So depending on the nature of your ticketing system, if you use something like ServiceNow or Jira, you can copy, paste the ticket that you're servicing with this restore request in the description field. You just heard me mention the audit log. So again, all activity is tracked here. So that's the basics. In terms of advanced options, you heard me mention a few minutes ago that you have the ability to more granularly determine what you wish to back up. So for something like Exchange Online, you may be backing up an entity that tells you, we really only need to back up our E3 users. Our kiosk users and Plan 1 users are all transient in nature and they don't store critical content. That's fine. You'll note here one of our filters is in fact Office 365 subscription name. So you can define a container for OneDrive for Business. So we only keep OneDrive content that has an Office 365 subscription name of E3. Likewise, say you're protecting a healthcare provider and they have a specific Azure AD group for end users that are subject to HIPAA. And there's always going to be individuals within any organization that aren't really subject to HIPAA constraints, but you want to make sure that you're capturing those that are. If you've got a custom attribute in Azure AD, we can leverage that. Likewise, if you've got a department, say, nursing or doctors or hospital staff, you can specify that department as a value in that department filter and ensure we're only capturing the OneDrive content that we really need to. You can do something similar with SharePoint. SharePoint, of course, doesn't have any individual users as your Active Directory attributes tied to it, so a SharePoint site won't have a city tagged to it. Instead, you have things like the SharePoint template name, the administrator, and so on. You heard me manage encryption capabilities. So again, that's all on the left-hand side there. You can specify a key identifier, ID, and secret. So in the event you wish to use your as an MSP key vault or leverage a customer key vault for storing encryption keys, you certainly can. And then lastly, one of the concerns that we always get is scalability. It's not uncommon for MSPs to come to us and say, hey, our primary practice is on boutique law firms or dental offices or manufacturing. And maybe they've got a lot of clients in the 20 to 100 users range. They've got one client that they've had for 20 years, has 800 to 1,000 employees, and anything going into that customer's environment always has to be carefully vetted. So in order to ensure scalability of our service, you can use multiple application profiles as well as multiple service accounts. That's how we're able to facilitate scaling of this solution from anywhere from 4 or 5 users all the way up to the tens of thousands. And in matter of fact, we do have enterprise customers that have well into the 4 and 5 figures worth of seats. Though this product is also very popular with institutions that might only have 10 or 20 users. Okay, so that actually wraps things about up on my end. I hope this was informative for those of you who are listening. If you do have any questions, please make sure you populate them in the chat. or otherwise make sure that those find their way to us. If you're interested in exploring the solution in greater depth, you can access a trial through the Carbonite Partner Portal if you have that link available. So thank you again for the time. Certainly do appreciate it.
All right, Ryan, thanks very much. This is Michael again from Channel Pro. I see a bunch of questions coming in, which is great. And also just a reminder, there is a Q&A box down in the lower center part of your browser window. Ryan, I don't know if you wanted to leave up any of your slides kind of with a call to action while we're doing Q&A. Feel free to do that if you do. Okay, there's one of the most common questions we're getting is, will the slides and presentation be available later? The answer to that is yes. Our team will send out something probably tomorrow with a link back to the recording and to the slides. So for those of you asking that, yes, we will take care of you there. Another question, this is for you, Ryan. Is your service available in other languages?
Yes, so right now we have English and French available. And then coming this November, well, it is November, sorry. Coming within the next 3 weeks, we will also have the service available in German. We're always keeping our eyes on additional linguistic and regional sovereignty requirements. Just to kind of build on that answer, the service itself offers data repositories in the US as well as the European Union that will be expanded within the next 3 months to Canada and Australia as well, and likely a UK data center as well. If there are specific concerns, say you operate a practice that deals with the Caribbean or Central America, we're always interested in hearing more. So make sure you reach out to your Carbonite AM who can get you a roadmap that might be more suitable for your region.
Okay, great. Ryan, another question for you. Does Carbonite offer like marketing materials that can help our audience today to sort of pitch some of these new services to their customers?
Yes. So again, talk to your AM. We're working on getting both general marketing materials, which we have quite a few of, as well as vertical specific marketing materials made available. So to be very honest with you, probably the biggest headwind we face with this product is going to be people who believe that Microsoft has them covered, which is true with respect to the availability of the solution, but not to backup and recovery. So a large part of our material is written around engaging on an educational basis as to the need of Office 365 backup. And we can certainly make that available to you.
Okay, next question, Ryan. Is this service marketed and sold to customer companies or just through the MSP channel?
So Carbonite, of course, sells through multiple channels. So we do have a customer direct business, though of course we would in many cases prefer to sell through MSPs, especially with smaller businesses. Honestly, we feel that MSP better represents their needs on a transactional basis than we could get otherwise. So yeah, while we do have a direct market motion where an MSP is in place, we would prefer the MSP to do the sale.
Okay. As a couple of questions now for and Rayanne, it's I'd love to hear sort of both you and Ryan respond to these. So with data protection just being much more important, if you could speak to sort of keeping service level agreements with customers kind of up to date, there's so much more data, there's so much more risk. How does really an MSP kind of protect themselves about the level of service they're providing for backing all that data up? I'd love to hear, Rayanne, your thoughts on best practices there for like SLAs and other agreements with the customer.
Generally, when you've got a backup system, managing data, hopefully you're checking on it fairly regularly. And if something fails or if a backup fails, you should get a notification in your PSA or in your email that something is wrong. So when you're doing your SLAs, any failed backup, I would think, should have a top priority, almost server down issue. Maybe not as dramatic as a server down issue, but it should be a fairly critical, piece that you want to make sure that that data is getting backed up, on schedule every day. And if there's something wrong, you need to get out there and check it out.
Okay, and what about where sort of responsibilities lie? Because we're talking about a few hands in here. Specifically, we've got, Microsoft, offering some level of service, Carbonite on top of that, and then the MSP trying to manage all of this data and the backing up or protection of it for the customer. Can either of you sort of speak to that sort of combination of players and how to, again, kind of protect the MSP from what they think they can guarantee for their customers? And if something does go wrong, where do you go for some remedy or help?
Yeah, that's always kind of a tough question. An MSP can offer something like an 8-hour RPO for Office 365, but in the event Microsoft does encounter a system-wide outage for 16 hours, then through no fault of their own, the MSP is breaking that agreement. So part of this is going to be carefully structuring the SLAs and OLAs with your customers to ensure that you're protecting yourselves in the event of a worst case scenario. And then another part of that is going to be setting reasonable recovery objectives. And I've seen a lot of what I can most charitably call loosely written OLAs, which indicate recovery will be executed within 8 hours or whatever the case may be. And if somebody loses an email, then certainly an 8-hour SLA is perfectly fine for the MSP to receive the ticket, respond to the customer, and recover that email. But it's probably not going to be adequate if the customer administrator goes into their account and wipes out 5 terabytes worth of SharePoint content. We can certainly get things started within 8 hours, but it's unlikely that that volume of data can be recovered entirely within that window. So cautious description of the nature of events and the response times is usually how we recommend handling this. And categorizing the SLA for certain tiers of events is going to be critical with that. So something that is, of course, disrupting the entirety of the company operations, like the deletion of a SharePoint site or an executive level email, or however else you choose to define it, should take a higher priority. On the other hand, something like tier 2 or tier 3 events, loss of a single email, could potentially take a different level of priority. And the SLA always needs to be very explicit in where the bottlenecks in the system may arise. So when we're talking about returning a company to operational stability, that we ensure that the SLA speaks to the beginning of that process, not necessarily its conclusion, so that the restore is underway within a defined period of time, not that it's necessarily finished. I guess kind of on a side note, one of the other products I handle within the Carbonite portfolio is our endpoint backup solution. And one of the questions we ask our very large customers when they pose this question is, what percentage of your company do you think you're ever going to need to recover on a day-to-day basis? Those of you who watched the news probably heard a couple years ago, Maersk got shut down for a couple days due to cryptoware. It got so bad to the point that they were essentially taking machines into regional IT offices, wiping them, re-imaging them, handing them back, and not connecting them to the domain. And I'm sure you can imagine there are some fairly obvious bottlenecks in that process, but it means that the best backup software in the world is going to be bottlenecked by the ability to get machines in and out of the IT office. So a solution that can recover terabytes per day may not be great if the personnel aren't available to make the most use of them. So I'd encourage you to ensure you tightly define what happens and when in your SLAs, as well as clearly identify what is the MSP, the Carbonite, and the Microsoft responsibility to ensure that the MSP is not taking accountability for a Microsoft failure. Does that adequately address the question?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Rand, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so Ryan, that was a really well thought out response. And while I agree on many levels that, for instance, the MSP should not be responsible for a Microsoft outage, at the same time, I also feel like it is the MSP's responsibility to ensure that if something malicious happens inside the company, like you said, the admin, maliciously deleting 5 terabytes of data, I think that becomes then the MSP's responsibility to ensure that there's some way to adequately restore that company to operations. But anyway, I really thought that your response was terrific. Thank you.
All right, looks like we've gotten through all the questions there. Just a quick reminder that there is a link in the chat window for all of our attendees where you can visit that link to learn more about creating a recurring revenue stream with Carbonite, which of course is the lifeblood of any managed service provider, is that ever important recurring monthly revenue. Now I want to go, if I can, kind of go around the virtual room here for some kind of parting thoughts. So Rayanne, maybe we can start with you. What do you want folks to take away today?
Well, one of the things I would like folks to take away today is, of course, we already know how important it is to have, backup, your data backed up, and have reliable backups. But if I could just add one parting thought is make sure you test those backups, test them regularly. They should be tested at least once a month, if not more often than that, to ensure that the data that's being backed up is restorable if you should ever need it.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Ryan. Ryan?
I would echo Ryan's thoughts. There tends to be a lot of complacency with respect to Office 365 and the belief that, Microsoft has everybody's back. I would encourage everyone here to, take a look at our link. Make sure you take the opportunity to kick the tires if you wish to. Like I mentioned, we do have trials available. And above all, make sure you're taking the time to educate your customers on Office 365. And that backup is not an attempt to scare people into thinking that Microsoft is going to lose their data, because it isn't. What we're really concerned with here is just the typical day-to-day human error that any organization is going to be subject to, and which is what we're protecting against.
All right, great points, great points. And all right, Rayanne Buccianico from ABC Solutions and Ryan Crompton from Carbonite, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and I greatly appreciate our audience today sticking around for all this content. This is Michael Siggins on the Channel Pro team. On behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you all for coming, and a quick reminder, keep an eye on your email inbox tomorrow, where we will be sending out some more info and the link to the recording and the slides. All right, on behalf of everybody here, we're going to end things now. So I wish you all a great day and thanks for coming. Bye-bye now.